Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am ManyNinjas, and this time around on this Retro Ninja Gaming short, we're going to be playing a little bit of Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate HD. That is actually one hell of a title there. And as I've actually finished through the main game at this point, which was rather enjoyable, although kind of a bit short on certain parts, we're going to go through the normal version of the boss rush. Which is, admittedly, it was incredibly fun, but very frustrating around the end, for reasons I'll make clear as we go along. Now, starting off, we start with the first main chapter's set of bosses, being, first of all, the Night Watchman. Now, realistically, you start off fighting off some of the Skavens here, and as long as you get through it, you avoid what will be an unblockable grab at the beginning there, and I'd have to honestly say this is just because of how kind of weak Simon Belmont is compared to the other two playable characters that come in the title, although I use the word two playable characters very loosely for reasons that become apparent if you play the game yourself. Simon probably is the least maneuverable Belmont, or least maneuverable character that you have available to you, on account that he has no extra or no double jump to speak of, and his items that you can use, being axe and the firebomb, are actually kind of useless for the most part. And even his magic, the Spirit of Belmont, is actually pretty decent just because of how it automatically blocks attacks for you. It kind of nails in comparison to what the other two characters you play on later in the game can do for their own sections of the game. As for something else that makes Simon's first few boss fights a little more challenging on this particular mode, to be very specific, is while the other two characters with their magic have ways to actually regain health, Simon has none. So you actually want to play his section either more conservatively, just to make sure you don't take any stupid hits, or you want to keep something like the Spirit of Atlantis equipped most of the time, just so anything that could tag you will get automatically blocked, even if it is for a bit of magic. You're more likely to get your magic power back than you are your health at this stage of the game. Unfortunately, since this character is actually a fully maxed out character, I actually went through all the trouble of getting 100% on all the player chapters, which, in case you have played this title, if you beat the game without getting it, it'll try to prompt you in order to play all the chapters to their absolute completion, aka get all the items, for what is a measly extra short video that takes place after your conventional ending, which is honestly not worth the trouble that they apply there. What you really want to collect those extra items for would be to collect all the extra kind of power-ups for your health and magic bars, as well as item use, really, just to make it so that your boss rush runs will be a lot more easier, just because you have more available to you at the time. Anyway, getting back to the actual game itself, Night Watchman is just about done. The game basically uses him as your intro boss, which will show you how some attacks will be unavoidable, but for the most part, most of the bosses have some setup there, where the first two attacks of a combo string will be able to be blocked or reflected, and the last one is the one, if you haven't already reflected the attack, you need to dodge the third and final attack, because that will be unblockable on the other hand. In terms of the Necromancer here, actually makes reference to a character from the first game, Zobek, which is kind of interesting enough since Zobek makes no proper appearance within the particular title here. And it also introduces, at least the first, actually no, it doesn't introduce anything, because the first boss battle with the Skavens introduces the idea of tossing in extra helpers for the bosses to help to just make it more tedious. Although I'd have to argue the skeletons and zombies that the Necromancer here can summon are not nearly as bad as the Skavens. Right, for this particular phase of the battle, they actually take away the soul of Belmont, so if you were using it beforehand in order to negate any hits that you could have gotten in, hypothetically now you have to dodge it manually. Realistically, I'm going to be honest, the Necromancer is an easier boss than the Night Watchman. Most of his attacks are just really lazy arcs, And he honestly telegraphs them so far in advance that as long as you're paying attention and not in the middle of another attack, you can see them all coming and counter-attack appropriately. This third phase here is basically testing, can you recognize when to jump or when to roll, and as long as you don't run too far ahead, you can pretty much get through the section completely unscathed without any real forethought. And that leads to this last shield section where you might want to go in right away, but realistically you want to wait until at least the second roundabout, where you can just roll in harmlessly. And that's all that was on this boss fight. The third and final boss for the Simon section of the game was the Succubus, which
don't you like how
I didn't let it play through fully, but the facial animation for this character leaves a little bit to be desired, I'm going to be honest here. There's just something weird going on with that character's face. Once again, pretty much by this point, once you just recognize how the character's pattern works, this is also an easier boss than the Night Watchman.
nobody says no to my chance.
It's effectively, at this point, after you dodge the ground wave, 3 fireballs, she'll do another small motion, then another ground wave, another few set of fireballs, and you keep doing this until eventually the shield starts flashing white like that, in which you can break it and start attacking her normally. Honestly, the only hard attack she has in the first part of this fight is that occasional spinning attack that she does there, just because it comes out a little faster than you might expect, and if you're attacking at that moment, you might not have the chance to dodge out of it. So effectively, that might be the only thing you might want to quickly turn on the Soul Lands for a quick second to avoid it if you would otherwise get hit guaranteed. In fact, that basically works for almost everything in this particular section where she's just flying around, except for maybe the unblockable grab, which she tried there for a brief moment. As a side note, speaking of the Sobolani, every time you break out of this particular cutscene, where she's trying to regain her health by sucking it out of one of the companions, I'm not sure exactly what those characters are supposed to represent at this point. Every time you use that and then use the quick time button pressing sequence, you have to turn the soul back on because it will automatically turn on each time. On this particular sequence, you realistically want to use an area attack to find out where the actual Succubus is, attack her Broken Sphere, and just keep willing on it, making sure to dodge the fireballs at the time. If you hit her just before she teleports, her orb, which is flashing red, will continue to flash red when she appears in a new spot, which will also be a telltale sign of where she actually is. Realistically, it's not that hard, it's just a matter of getting to the right spot. Even here, as long as you know where you are, and just look at some of how these attacks get telegraphed. Basically, I was attacking at that point, so that's the only reason I got caught. Most of her attacks take quite a bit of long time to get out there, except for that one spinning attack, so this is just a really easy boss overall. Basically, yep, down she goes. And there's another sample of that fun facial animation there. Just kind of really weird what they did with the jaw there. Anyway, now we're on to the Chapter 2 bosses with Alucard set, starting off with what's left of the Night Watchman, aka the Reaver at this point, which is just a giant scathing sort of thing. Admittedly, this would not be one of my better bosses. For the quick bites at the start there, can you counter those? I think so. Let me take another look. If you see the large flash, that means it's an unblockable attack, but I think you can actually reflect some of the smaller bites there. And in terms of those small exploding packages, whatever those exactly are, I don't remember, you can actually reflect those back with an area attack. And the small scathings, which gets tossed out during the course of this fight, are good for building back up your magic meter as you go along, which will be really helpful if you weren't doing too well with the earlier sets of bosses, because Alga's mist form actually can be used in order to gain some health, which will become more apparent in probably when the character starts trying to dash in my direction, or the Reaver, I should say, tries to dash in my direction. As for what's going on in these quick time events, you realistically want to get through that section as fast as you can, because the boss's health will actually regenerate during that point where it's just standing there, so you don't want to take too long. And realistically, you have to be able to do that at least 3 times, and that's when the boss will finally die out. In terms of the Reaver, if you manage to get it so it gets knocked down a few times, it'll make your life a lot easier, because once you knock it down or knock it off to the side, it takes a few moments in order to get back up, and during the time you can just wail on it for a few free hits. The only other thing here basically with Skaven is to get tossed out every now and then. You realistically want to send them with an upward strike at the end, just so you can attack them freely in the air without being attacked from behind or from the main boss itself. Especially a good thing to know to do when you have more than one that's hanging around the screen at once. And of course, if you have any health issues, you definitely want to take advantage of the Skavens in order to rebuild your magic meter and thus go back in the mist form in order to regain a bit of health. Now, on a side note, if you happen to get caught during this dash attack, I don't know how long it takes before it starts damaging you, or if it turns out to be an instant kill, but you can basically just mash X to get out of there, and it'll set you back to at least a decent position, depending on where it caught you. For the various Alucard fights, if you're going to have a sub-weapon handy, you want to use the stopwatch here. If the boss is actually trying to run towards you and catches your bats, it will end up spitting your bones back out at you, so that can do at least a few hits of damage there, which is not exactly what you want to do. That's the opposite. Alright, this will be the second time that it goes into that position trying to regain some health. You set some more acid on it, and then it begins what is the third and final real pattern of this particular boss fight. It'll be a lot of what you saw before, as well as jumping up to the raft area and sending a bunch of these exploding pills or eggs your way, which you can use your area attacks to knock further out, or just run and air dash out of the way, just so you're not there when the explosions come down. And of course, after doing that a handful of times, 3 to 4 really, he'll hop back down or try to dash back down in order to jump straight at you with a lunge. He'll do this every little bit there. It went back up relatively quickly just because of how much damage had been done to it at the earlier points of the fight. And that was a really generous hitbox it just gave for that lunge. For the most part, if you just get a general idea of when everything is going to go down, it's not a hard boss fight per se. It's just really kind of time consuming, if anything. And if you don't have the dodges, yeah, that was a really generous hitbox because I was already way up in the air when it hit me that time, I think. Sorry, what was I saying? Basically, if you can get a general handle of when to counter the assorted bites, then you'll also have an easier time knocking it over, which will let you get some more free hits in, and this boss fight will become a complete joke then. I would say of the assorted boss fights we're going on in boss rush mode, this might be maybe the third most difficult, I'd honestly have to say, of the ones that that you'll end up going through. The second most, I would say, just because of the skill set he has handy, would probably be the Night Watchman. And at least from my own personal experience, the first and foremost most difficult fight that will end up coming up in boss rush mode doesn't show up again until the Trevor series of fights. And not even so much because of the boss fight, but because of an extra hazard, which I'll point out once that boss comes up. Oddly enough, that they're really generous with how much you can kind of hide in that cove there, you know, to just dodge any of the attacks. Basically, if you're right against the wall, you won't get hit. Although if you're jumping at the time, the skaters that will pop out of the boss will in fact attack you for at least a quick, cheap hit. Anyway, with that little last bit, that boss is done, Reaver is gone, and now we meet the Demon Lord revisited.
I knew it couldn't be that easy. Much better. This way, I'll be able to deliver your remains to the toy maker.
Yeah, he's seen better days. Realistically, for the most part, what you need to know about the Demon Lord is you need to dodge all his attacks, and that was not how to dodge that attack, by the way, because all of his attacks will be unblockable. He'll leave himself up for a lot of openings even during his unblockable attacks, but yeah, that's really, you have to actually dash underneath him. Why I was not doing it there, I don't know. Kept jumping for some reason. But basically, during the first phase of the fight, this is his attack sequence. 3 straightforward attacks, maybe the laser, and then that large backflip. And that's all you have to worry about then. You hit him enough times, he starts using his laser light show, which I don't know the proper name.
Now, more powerful than ever.
As he's just doing his little dance bit in the background. Unfortunately, the lasers do move quite a bit there, but if you use something like the time stop or the stopwatch, you can actually slow things down well enough that you can do the couple of combos in a row there. You want to block that shockwave, which is something that will end up coming up later in the fight as well. Honestly, this would be the, as long as you have the general wherewithal in order to remember how to dodge the attacks, this would be the easiest of Alucard's bosses. Knock him back after a bit more hits. Now you have to beat basically the power source you didn't break the first time. You need to go after now, and instead of doing 2 separate ones, now it has 1 giant bar. You basically just abuse the stopwatch if you want to spare them, or you don't want to spare anything for later, and just break it down more. You could also turn into wolf form and break those things down faster, but I'd rather reserve the magic as a backup plan in case you end up getting beat up a little more than you want. And basically just saving it for mist form in order to dash through the next boss and everything. This particular boss fight, part of the boss fight, you have to remember to dash out of the way of what will be only 2 of the 3 attacks for this one. But of course, using your block whenever the shockwaves come up in order to get out of or prevent the hit. And once you beat up the boss enough, Demon Lord, you just need to grab him, and then yeah, the rest of the sequence takes care of itself. Anyway, now to the last boss of the Alucard set. It's the tag team fight against Dracula himself, aka Gabriel Belmont, aka why does this man not have a shirt? Pretty much all that's going on here is at the first part of the fight, you're both using the opportunity to just beat him down at the same time. It's actually really simple. I'd say this would be... I actually wouldn't say any of the Dracula fights in this game are hard. Just as soon as you get a handle on where the attacks go. Fortunately, Simon has no set health bar amount, so he can take as much of a beating as possible. You just have to really worry about keeping yourself in one piece. After hitting Dracula enough times though, then it becomes Alucard versus Dracula. He gets an extra dash attack thrown in there. And it's honestly just more of the same, only with one person attacking at once.
Such a disappointment. You have let me
Dracula's Blood Whip is actually when you want to use the opportunity to parry him. Because on the first 2 hits, you can parry him, and if you knock him down during those bits, I think you can have a better chance of actually getting some extra magic back, which you can use for later. The attacks themselves are pretty easy to dodge if you happen to find yourself accidentally missing the timing for the parries, but for the most part, this is still an easy section of the fight. Now, for the third part of the fight, you basically have to parry right away, and in order to defeat this somewhat possessed Simon Belmont, you need to parry his attacks. After the first parry, he'll throw an axe and then do a simple whip again. After this one, you actually want to dodge because he'll use his firebomb instead of the axe. And you can't really parry that. And after the third parry, it's back to normal. And it'll be both of you against the boss at once.
You're pathetic.
Realistically, you can mash out of this in time, but as long as your partner is standing up, he can also whip Dracula and knock you back to safety. And I've never actually seen the blood whip attack, grab attack there, actually cause any damage, because usually Simon will break you out in time if you don't manage to free yourself. But of course, remember, Dracula can also use that on Simon too, so you realistically want to help out when you can. It's also good to get a free hit in if he's grabbing your partner as well. Honestly, at this point, he'll be using a bit of all the attacks earlier, plus the extra grip there, which is admittedly kind of a waste of an attack. And you just have to team up and just keep wailing on him until he runs out of health. Honestly, for a Dracula encounter, this is actually pretty easy. This is definitely not endgame Dracula for any other conventional Castlevania. Let's see at this point. Yep, Simon can knock him out after 1 or 2 hits. Although if you really mash the X button quickly enough, you can actually free yourself, and your character, or Alucard, will actually just kind of drop down after breaking the grip. It's actually kind of sad how weak Dracula is on what would be the furthest incarnation of him, but there's not much that can be done when you have literally 2 Belmonts wailing on him at one. Oh, and I just kind of spoiled what the secret behind this Alucard is, but if you played the game, you kind of already figure out what his identity was. Anyhow, moving on to the 3rd chapter. Trevor's bosses were admittedly less than creative, but they make up for it by the fact that the executioner here is incredibly tenacious. And you have to hit triangle in order to dodge the grip per time. And 90% of the time, it's incredibly easy. I just botched the timing. In terms of what's going on with the executioner, you just honestly have to wail on him for a while. Around the midway point, he'll start throwing in an extra dash attack, which you double jump and then dash over. If you do it close enough to the wall, it'll leave them open to an extra hit. And if you happen to have any spare magic, you can use the light magic in order to increase your health using basically any attacks to just wail on the executioner here. And as for the items, honestly, Trevor's items are kind of weak as well. The character in this game with the best item usage overall would have to have been Alucard with the stopwatch. Realistically, the glaive and this lightning bomb, they might have some uses against regular enemies, but in terms of bosses, they're pretty damn useless. That is the second new attack that this executioner is going to get, which is basically dodge by dashing or rolling underneath it. The most of the time, though, it will end up doing the straightforward dash. Just let it run into the wall for a few quick cheap hits. The only thing I would say, based on experience, is just make sure you keep some distance for when you start doing the double jump into the dash, because otherwise, if you're not high enough, he'll end up catching you anyway, even if it looks like you should clear it, and it actually does do a lot of damage. Stupid amounts of damage. And if he happens to get you caught into a corner, you're actually kind of screwed with this boss. Just because it makes it harder to get around him for the most part. This last unskippable part is once you knock his health low enough, you have to grapple him, and then that will finally finish the boss off. Your second boss of the sequence is the Lady of the Crypt, which is just actually the first part, because the second half of this fight is entirely quick time event, which thankfully you can skip, or you skip for the course of this boss rush. And this is maybe the second easiest boss in this particular setup, just because he's basically just parrying, which is basically, you don't have to even time the parries in this for this fight very carefully. For this next attack, it does a couple of straightforward dashes. You just jump over, and the boss will somehow end up dizzy for a few free hits. And it only gains one more extra attack after wailing on it here for an extra little bit, being an attack where it'll try to grab you from below the ground. I know the control setup, if you have your DualShock or your general controller's rumble feature turned on there, the controller shaking is supposed to help you indicate which is which and when the character is supposed to come up, but if there's a direct way to tell from the rumbles alone, I haven't come up with it yet. As long as you're ready to kind of jump or roll out of the way, though, you'll be ready for just about anything. It's honestly more of a clock padding fight than anything else. And I'm just simply very, very happy that you get to skip the QTE for this particular fight, because when I was doing the QTE for the actual game itself, I got to hear Trevor's wimpy yell quite a bit. Alright, and here's the last of the regular bosses, a rematch with the Executioner. And this is the one I'd call the hardest fight in the game. And the reason why is in the background throwing firebombs at me. You have a pair of hunchbacks that come back and forth with basically Molotovs the whole damn time. And they aim those Molotovs where you're standing at the time. So basically, you have your combos constantly interrupted partway through. And it's just no fun. As the game's own tip system indicates, you get more damage overall, not from individual attacks, but by completing whole chains, because your chain finishers are what do the most damage. But because of the way this whole system and this whole fight is set up there, you often don't get to finish any of your chains, so you're doing incomplete weak attacks the whole time. Your area attacks, while they have a slightly longer range, are just generally weaker than your direct attacks, but the most damaging parts of direct attack only occur if you happen to finish your combos, or if you happen to use some of the special kind of unlockable attacks that go along there. But also those have more of a startup, and it's harder to interrupt those at the same time, which makes certain extra hits kind of harder to do. Such as the guillotine final, does quite a bit of damage, but needs a lot more wind-up there. I don't remember the exact name of it right now, but the special, if you hold on to oh, this is kind of a bad situation. You don't want to get caught in a corner with the Executioner, especially when it's about to have a bomb thrown at you in a second. Fortunately, I just lucked out there and got some health back for my trouble. Just generally, you always want to keep yourself more centered in this fight and keep the boss as the one on the edges. If you find yourself in a corner, you're realistically screwed. Most of the times when I've lost on boss rush, it's actually been on this boss fight, and And as a result, because I got cornered either because of the executioner and a badly timed double jump and dash, or because of those hunchbacks, forcing me to jump at an inopportune time where I can't dodge one of the executioner's attacks properly. That's usually how you get screwed over in this fight. So this is what this fight probably added quite a few more minutes than it should have, just because of how much time having to dodge the hunchbacks ends up adding to the fight. And now, after defeating the second executioner, you are rewarded with one last battle with Dracula. But for this fight, you have unlimited magic. And unlimited magic basically means, as long as you make sure you have the same magic type as Dracula is using, such as when he's using the Void Sword there, you have your light magic equipped, so if he does hit you, he does almost no damage, but you can use any opportunity to add health to yourself by hitting with light magic. So even if you have a pitiful amount of health as I did, you can build yourself back up to a full bar with a few moments of attacking with light magic alone. Realistically, yes, this does add a lot of time to my overall final time slot, but it'd be kind of embarrassing after getting through everything else only to die on the last and honestly easiest of the two Dracula fights in this game. As for how this fight is supposed to work, when he's using light magic, you use dark magic, and vice versa. Of course, as a result, if you're using the appropriate magic, you do more damage to him, but if he does hit you, he does significantly more damage to you at the same time. So realistically, this real strategy you want to use for this fight is when you're in a good opportunity to hit him, yes, use the appropriate magic. But if you're in a position where you think he might actually be able to hit you, you quickly change to the same type of magic he uses, so that if you do end up taking a hit, it'll be for a fraction of what it would have normally hit you for. Especially if you're using light magic there. When he's using light magic, odds are, through a quick set of attacks, you'll get back whatever would have hit you, and probably a good amount more. At this point, I'm just honestly trying to rebuild my own health bar in order to get back to the appropriate amount, and once I have a full set of health again, I can switch back, or I can switch properly to dark magic and then start attacking him for real. Because although I've been taking him a lot, as you can see, I haven't even taken off a tenth of his health yet. Just because I'm using the wrong type of magic for the job. Alright, my own health is back, so let the fight begin for real now. For that 4 sword swing sequence there, you can parry the first 2 of his sword attacks, but the third one, if you could parry it, I don't know. No, you can't. The flash indicates, ouch. Now you can see what a proper hit looks like. If you get hit using the wrong type of magic. But the third and fourth swing of this sequence are both unblockable. And if you are trying to get out of the way, you want to roll forward under the third upward swing, because the fourth one has extra long blade on it, so unless you're more than 1 roll distance away, probably more like 2 or 3, it'll basically hit you no matter what. For the most part, you need to get Dracula down to take off at least a quarter of his health in order to get to the next sequence, where he'll start changing to using dark magic instead. So one more proper sequence. Let's see if I can... Oh, that didn't take long. sequence there, this 3-sequence punch, you can block or counter the first 2 hits and parry those. The ground attack you can't really parry. This ground punch you can't parry either. They're both all blockable, but after 4 or 5 successive rolls on the way, you can start attacking him for some free hits in the meanwhile. You could attack him in theory, get a quick shot or 2 in while he's doing that, but it's probably safer to roll. This is a particularly good technique during that part of the fight. Wait with the wrong type of magic, or dark magic versus dark magic. If you're able to parry his attack, then quickly switch into light magic in order to do the trick. And you'll want to do the same with light magic. The cutscene itself describes what you're supposed to do when he starts doing the area of effect attack. Honestly, he only uses that particular area of effect attack every now and then, and for the most part resorts to just more of what he had been doing up to that point. Once you get a handle there, and as long as you keep your health relatively high, even if it's a little time consuming, this last Dracula fight is actually really simple. It's actually, I'd say, definitely easier than the second Executioner fight. And it's probably, with the exception of the Lady in the Crypt boss fight, as long as you don't count the QTE setup, it's probably the easiest of the boss fights for Trevor's boss set. In terms of the item selection for this fight, the lightning bomb is pretty useless. Glaive is also pretty useless. Honestly, for overall item consumption for the boss fight, I'd say if you need to, maybe use a few for Simon, but you're going to be using 90% of your items for Alucard's run, just because the stopwatch is just that good compared to everything else. Alucard overall had the better of the item selections for all the characters in this overall game. It's like with the bat, it's like, okay, the bats are a chargeable projectile, which works really well. The stopwatch, I can't recall if you can charge a stopwatch in the same way as everything else, but just generally the stopwatch's features, which you can continue by just throwing another stopwatch before it fully runs out, which has proved much more useful than anything else that comes up in the game. Quite frankly, honestly, there's not too much more to say about this particular boss fight. It's actually really straightforward, and even with the demonstrations they show you basically what you need to do in order to succeed there. So I guess probably the worth mentioning is, of course, the multiple difficulties of the boss fight. Basically will alter how much damage is done from player to boss, and of course boss to player will be much more multiplied. So you have to be a lot more careful on the later difficulties. And probably one of the few things which kind of quirk me about the whole Lord of Shadow series here is just, let's be honest, Lady Jono, just what is it with all the people with the Belmont Clan? What do they have against shirts? Just hear me out on here. Yeah, let's be honest. If you're watching this, you probably already know how this particular story ends and how this particular fight ends, with Trevor basically taking his own combat cross through the chest there. And it's like, look, where he ends up getting stabbed, it's through the part of the chest where the shirt is left completely open there. He has points, he actually has a shirt, and like, his father Gabriel there, where apparently after all the years of being undead, it's like, you know what, I just don't care anymore. It's now shirt optional, it's just the robe is good enough, I guess. Is what he ended up doing. After being dead for a while, Trevor comes back as Alucard, and apparently he was buried without a drip because he clearly has none when he's back up and running. And okay, at least in Simon's case, it makes a little more sense because at least he's got some more general kind of armor-esque look with that giant kind of stomach-based armor there. It's like, at least it's body armor, it can kind of fit there. And he's got that fuzzy boa thing going on there. He's basically described as a barbarian, so it's like, okay, a barbarian-like character? Fine. This one's justifiable. Why, he might not be the most dapper fellow around. But it's like, for everyone else, it's like, yeah, this is just kind of a bad idea. Hell, even in general, it's like, I'm going to be fighting against things which are unnatural and not of this world. Maybe I might want to opt to at least wear something that provides a little bit of chest protection. It's like, let's cover some of the vital organs in my general torso. Alright, we'll continue that tangent here. The funny thing, the one QTE you can't, or one of the two QTEs you can't skip is
You will never defeat me.
the last of the Dracula. This last of the Dracula fight where you have to dodge his fireballs here. What they don't mention during this boss fight, if you let go of the stick, he'll put you back in a neutral position, which is something I didn't know for this run, which you can see why now.
You will never defeat me.
The funny part, if you lose in a Q2E, it doesn't actually end the fight for you, or it doesn't automatically result in defeat. And the game is at least kind enough, it's like, okay, you beat all the bosses fair and square, we'll let you keep doing this section over again until you actually finish it off. The only penalty you get if you don't do it in time is a time penalty, because the clock keeps running. Well, that's the last of the boss rush on normal mode. Let's see what the final time is. It's like 36 minutes. Is honestly, it's not a great time. 36:37. I'm globally on this run. It's 59th place. What it doesn't mention here, 59th place is last place. At least I'm within the top 100, even if it is last place. Go me. Catch you all next time on a more complete Retro Ninja Gaming.